philosopher Rony Guldmann, and I try to understand the world around me. I just keep turning to Rony's book, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. It's been the biggest staple in my reading list for understanding the world since discovering it about 2 years ago. Rony, we're on the Trump administration's second term. What's one thing that's grabbed your attention?
Well, it's something which happened early on and has not grabbed the headlines it deserves because, it's not that huge a deal, but, philosophically, psychologically, in terms of what it reveals, what it encapsulates, what it symbolizes, I think there could be, nothing better to symbolize the ethos of the Trump administration as a whole. And so, this relates to your neck of the woods, the LA fires, and the question of whether anything could have been done to mitigate the damage, and there are different, arguments on various sides. As far as, was there enough water available? There are some questions about whether the pressurization systems in the LA area were sufficient. I think there was one reservoir which was down for maintenance for quite a while. So there's the issue of course, to create higher pressurization could have cost billions of dollars. So I don't know that people would have actually approved of that. Hindsight is 2020. But anyway, so my point is that to the extent that there was a water issue, a water availability issue in the LA area, it was a function of the local pressurization. It was not a function of how much water was made available to Southern California from reservoirs and basins in Northern California. Because most of the water there comes from the Colorado River, not Northern California. Nevertheless, early on, Trump came out with this story that the LA fires proved as uncontrollable as they did, because Governor Gavin Newsom, in order to save some fish, had sort of cut off the water from flowing to Southern California, dumping it into the ocean instead. And so, Trump was seizing on that as like a prime illustration of liberal madness. Again, as I said, that's completely false, because it's not a question about general availability of water in Southern California. It's the pressurization system, if anything, if there's an issue. And then Trump just would not get off that. It was the basis for his attacks on Newsom. And so at one point he writes, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, they have now released water in Northern California, which will become available to Southern California. So he made this statement, and then shortly thereafter there was a press release saying, no, nothing of the sort has happened. This is just a standard procedure. The spigots were down for 3 days for maintenance. Now they came back online. Nothing special has happened. And so Trump, embarrassed by that and wanting to vindicate his thesis that the cause of the LA fires' magnitude was this dumb water policy, ordered the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, who control some of the dams in Northern California, to release a bunch of water, and then tweeted that, saying, look what I've done. I've ordered the U.S. Army to release water to help save LA. In reality, none of that water could ever make it down to LA. Number two, it was being held in reserve to help the farmers in the Central Valley during the dry season in a few months. And three, had it not been stopped as soon as it had been, it could have caused massive flooding. Now, at the end of the day, I don't know, what the total damage is, but I can say, if you think about that story alone, think about nothing else, and there's nothing, the buffoonery. It's not a partisan, like my rendition doesn't depend on any partisan or ideological assumptions. You just take that incident alone. I mean, I think that would politically, prior to the Trump era, that would have sufficed to destroy any politician. It might have been grounds for the impeachment of a president to do something which was so manifestly against the public interest, just so you could make better propaganda and facts that are completely indisputable. Uh, and yet it was almost nothing. It's barely discussed, but it's very resonant for me. There's no better picture of who Trump is, as far as I can tell.
What's the what's the what's the philosophical perspective on this? Like, let's forget it was Donald Trump. Let's say it was Joe Smith who was president of the United States when this happened, and everything else was say the same. Like, as a philosopher, how do you see that? What's the importance of that from a philosophical perspective?
Well, I mean, what does it reveal about who we're willing to put into power? I mean, what does that reveal about the judgment of the American people, of the very rapid transformations of mores that took place in very short order? I mean, it certainly reveals something about the fragility, and I guess conservatives can appreciate that, the profound fragility of social norms, which precisely because of their fictitiousness are very vulnerable to upset and delegitimization under certain circumstances, which Trump knows how to create. As far as, what does it reveal, philosophically or ideologically about Donald Trump? Well, I think it illustrates something which a number of people have said, which strikes me as plausible, that he himself doesn't have any very deep ideologies or worldviews. He may have certain aversions against certain kinds of immigrants and other groups, but that's not that. It's kind of a visceral sort of thing, not a profound worldview. But it's just the vanity and the pride and all the classic sins, which people who maybe do have stronger ideological impulses, a JD Vance and Elon Musk, know how to hitch their train to. So in Trump, you just have this bundle of recalcitrant, uncontrollable energy, but various people have sort of found ways to channel it in certain directions.
So, have you heard of this Protestant thinker who's received a long profile in the New York Times 9 days ago, Aaron Renn? And
I haven't.
okay, so he's best known for his theory of that America is a negative country now for Christians. So his theory goes like this: that up until about 1992, America was fundamentally a pro-Christian country overall. Between 1992 and 2015, approximately, America was a neutral country for Christians. And since Obergefell, since 2015, approximately, the United States has become a negative country for Christians. And one of his points following from that is that Donald Trump could only become president, could only seriously run for president in a post-Christian America. And I love that analysis, and I think he's right. What do you think about the idea that Donald Trump could only have a chance at being president of the United States in a post-Christian America?
And I guess not to expand on that thesis, maybe we would say, he could only win. Not only would it have to be a post-Christian America, but you would also it would have to also have to be in America, where a lot of the traditional Christians, the conservative Christians, the evangelical Christians, have sort of resigned themselves to the post Christianity, which is how they can forgive him all of his vices and sins, and be so non-judgmental. Maybe they kind of realize we're never going to this is the best we're going to get. And I guess so long as he can succeed in antagonizing the traditional enemies of the conservative Christians, maybe from their standpoint, well, that's the most they can hope for. They're
And
not going to get a president who's some sort of 1950s painting.
right, and let me think how to put this. So we're feels like we're in unprecedented times. Christianity was a dominant force. Oh, so here's the point. You wrote a book about conservative claims of cultural oppression,
Yes.
and running through that book, you could also understand it as normative or traditional Christianity and traditional Judaism and probably traditional Islam as well could be best understood with regard to those who occupy most of our institutions, particularly our cultural institutions, as operating under cultural oppression. Fair?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, certainly. Traditional there's a certain conception of religion which is certainly going, if you are a follower of that, you are definitely going to feel oppressed in the modern order. You're not hallucinating, because you for a pluralistic multicultural society to exist, you have to stigmatize um, certain ways of believing in God or believing in the higher. That doesn't mean you penalize the profession of theological tenets. You can on that front, of course, you can believe what you want, and that's all good. You can believe in Jesus. You can believe in Wiccan witchcraft. They don't care. So from that point of view, yes, it's liberalism is tolerant, but in order to create the conditions for that tolerance, they have to thin out religion and reduce it to a set of beliefs which are free to express. But they have to stigmatize anybody who's going to be uh so beholden to their religion as to be given to maybe certain potentially illiberal fervors. Um and so yeah, that's where we're coming from. And a lot of people do come from that way because that was our default setting for many millennia before the modern world. So no great surprise that there's a strong residue of that. Yeah, you're going to feel oppressed. It's a natural feeling.
So Aaron Renn turned his essay into a book, and it's an excellent companion volume to your work in progress, Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression. It's called Life in the Negative World, Confronting Challenges in an Anti-Christian Culture. And I'm thinking about one thread in your book, and that is for men who are not feminists. They, in the United States, in most of our institutions, they face life in the negative world, confronting challenges in an anti-masculine culture, in that our education system rewards females for coloring between the lines. Many of my teachers say that I was the most challenging student they ever had, and they did not mean that as a compliment. I noticed my female classmates would do much better with teachers by repeating back to teachers what the teachers wanted to hear. It is much more of a masculine thing to challenge. Also, we live in a world shaped by evolution where, according to one theory, 80% of women reproduce historically, while only 40% of men reproduce. So men have to take chances if they want to reproduce. And we live in a world where if you are legible and part of a men's only group, you are highly likely to get blown up. So one of Aaron Rand's many great points is that it really helps if you're a dissident to be illegible, meaning don't be part of a formal men's only group, but go away with your mates on for
Right.
for a men's weekend, but don't be legible and be part of a men's only group. And so it's just kind of an extrapolation on your book. It's one application of your book that there is a thread going through it that could be called Life in the Negative World, Confronting Challenges in an Anti-Masculine Culture. Any thoughts?
Well, look, I mean, certainly, you certainly have lots of feminists who will claim that there are lots of matriarchal, archaic or tribal cultures out there, and maybe there are some, but we know that the in terms of the anthropological record, that's certainly a rarity. And feminism, it makes sense under certain conditions, right? I mean, yeah, you're right. Conditions of relative safety and security, conditions where physical strength in most professions doesn't matter all that much. And also, you say conditions under which more regulated behavior is fruitful as well. So I mean, you could say, what is this alignment between conservatism and masculinity? And I mean, you have the worst examples of that. Your Andrew Tates and so forth. But I don't think it's just a gimmick insofar as I see the defensive masculinity. It's just one iteration of conservative claims of cultural oppression, because the ultimate target, it's the civilizing process, or the over civilizing process as it's experienced by some. So yeah, again, there is. Feminists will say, "Well, we can discard all these concerns because at the end of the day, all the top, businesses and law firms and so forth are still, male dominated, and well, so be it. That's true, but that primal male alienation from modern culture, it's consistent with my theory. Certainly, I think it's consistent with evolutionary psychology, even though the extent to which that's a science is maybe open to debate. But it kind of makes sense that a lot of the problems we have right now, whether we're talking about masculinity or obesity or whatever, there is a mismatch between what we evolved to be under ancestral conditions and then the conditions which we face today, where we have to adapt to them, even though biologically we're not really that much different from our ancient ancestors. So that's a source of a lot of problems, and the discourse of masculinity, I think, is one of them.
So a few weeks ago, one of my Orthodox Jewish friends said to me, "Now that Trump's president, we can say the word retard again."
Mhm.
There seems to be a vibe shift. I was shocked by how peaceful America was after Trump's election. I expected days of rioting. Anything you've noticed about the vibe shift since Trump's 2024 election win?
Well, I mean, there is it's not what has happened is what the worst pessimists have happened. I think a lot of people, I mean, feel a certain stupefaction that things which at one point would have been like clearly delegitimizing and outside the Overton window, like the suggestion that maybe we won't obey the courts, have now come into the mainstream. Um, so it's I guess Americans can sort of no longer, at least for many people, many liberals, many never Trump conservatives, they kind of have to admit on some level that their former exaltation of America as a special country, as a model or a paragon, was kind of a conceit on some level. I think it's a deflation of the sense of American exceptionalism that certain groups of people formerly entertained.
So, do you see America as better governed or worse governed since Trump took office the second time?
I think far worse governed. I think there is this idea, like the Doge committee, um, the idea that you could just go and like see spreadsheets or transactions in the Department of the Treasury or whatever, and you could just like, because of your own brilliance, simply look at the spreadsheet and identify the fraud. I think it's completely comical. It's like something out of a movie. It's not real. I mean, we know that they have no understanding of what they're reading, as evinced by their many mistakes. The tariffs, obviously, I'm frightened to have to go retrieve my tax documents from my various accounts. I'm very frightened to see the diminution in my stocks. I mean, that's quite serious. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a complete shit show. I don't. The deficit will grow larger with these tax cuts. And I mean, they're not trying to make it work well. They're trying to make it work badly. So I guess in that respects, they are successful. By their own standards. I guess they can't be criticized, but I certainly wouldn't call it good governance.
So, Trump 2 is worse than you expected.
It was within. It was. I, I didn't know for sure. I didn't think. In terms of the violations of the law and the Constitution, that was certainly. I thought that was certainly within the realm of possibility. The tariffs. I guess I was like a lot of traditional conservatives thought, like, in the end he cares too much about the stock market. He's not going to do something completely thoughtless and reckless at the end of the day. But maybe that's wrong. So yeah, I'm not shocked. It could have been better, but this is not surprising.
So I'm giddy during Trump 2. So I'm just having an absolute ball. I'm just loving every minute of it.
Well, it's
Uh,
really entertaining. I'm not disputing that.
Incredibly entertaining and
Well,
hilarious.
just as at the end of the Zelensky ambush, Trump said, "Well, this is going to make for great TV." And so again, yeah, by a Trumpist metric, uh, it's certainly entertaining. But by an American metric, it's certainly entertaining. There's had Kamala Harris won, my 401k would have been in better shape, but I wouldn't have as much to think about. So and there are
Well,
trade offs. You can say that.
I mean, also from a place of epistemic humility, and that the world is a far more complicated place than we can understand, that we can perhaps discern patterns. but from a place of epistemic humility that, have no idea how this is going to turn out. And we're just on a ride and it's going to be a thrill. It's just hilarious. It is just so effing funny.
For sure. The even when people try to be predictable and governments try to be predictable, the world still is unpredictable. And now we're in a situation where, the most powerful man in the world doesn't even care about that at all, doesn't even care about the semblance of it. And so that is, chaos is just it's a concomitant of the human condition, but Trump is certainly placing that chaos on overdrive. So, from the point of view of like the I think Kant, maybe he took it from Edmund Burke. Somebody had a certain concept of the sublime, where you are sitting on the shore, on a rocky shore, and there's of the ocean, and it's a very stormy night, and you see a ship off in the distance, struggling with the storm, but you are kind of outside of it, appreciating the sublimity of that terror. I can kind of see that, if that's what you're experiencing, and that's certainly understandable to me.
So, what would have happened to a fellow classmate of yours at Stanford Law who said out loud in a social group, I've got nothing against homosexuals, I just feel uncomfortable around them?
Well, that would certainly be, yeah, that would certainly be stigmatized. I don't think, even if you were to say, yeah, it's not that I think objectively, I don't have some sort of ideology that what they're doing is wrong. I just subjectively, even if you acknowledge it as a kind of subjective feeling, yeah, that would be kind of stigma. That would be stigmatized.
That would be social death. Like
Was
if you
that?
said it, you
I
just
think
said
so.
it matter of factly out loud
Yeah, even
to
if
a
it was
bunch of
matter of
people.
fact, like, even
Yeah,
if you were for gay marriage, even if you were saying, well, these are just my
right.
subjective feelings,
Yeah,
I'm not saying they should be, translated into
yeah.
law. Notwithstanding, all of those concessions, yeah, it would be, because it's people would see that aversion as revealing something about you that's disquieting, and dark, and unappealing and unattractive. Yeah, so that would be social death, even if it was just that and nothing more. I agree. Yeah.
And would you be shocked if perhaps a majority of heterosexual men did experience something like that, but were just too afraid
Um.
to say it out loud?
Well, I think it's obviously going to vary between one community and the next. I don't think that's the case in my milieu. Now, and again, I want to say that, there's also a difference between feeling like kind of grossed out by the thought of homosexual sex
No, I'm just saying
versus
uncomfortable around homosexuals. I would
being
warrant to you that
uncomfortable around
a majority
homosexuals.
of men, a majority of heterosexual men feel uncomfortable around homosexuals. A majority of left wing liberal men who are heterosexual feel uncomfortable around homosexuals. They just won't say so.
Um, I think, look, so for example, let's say the gay people that I've known in my life, and not that many, but in terms of their temperament and disposition, it's not. They're not obviously different from anyone else. Like, there's no, there's like, amongst some, there's a certain, flamboyant effeminacy, but in a situation where, yeah, they have their sexual proclivities, but it's not the defining feature of their identity, and it doesn't like stand out.
Would you
Uh,
admit it, even if you had felt that? Would you admit it publicly?
would I admit?
Feeling uncomfortable around gay men. Would you admit that publicly if you had felt that?
Oh well, I mean, what I guess what I'm saying is, so what would I do? I don't know, because it's a completely, because I really don't, among like the gay men that I've known, like some people in academia and elsewhere. Yeah, okay. Let's say I could imagine being in like certain gay subcultures and going to some gay bar where they have like their own very different set of mores. Yeah, I would probably feel uncomfortable there. If somebody, somebody like that, like some obvious like sexual nonconformist, I don't know. They asked me on the street, "Where's the subway?" Like, I mean, under normal conditions, I just wouldn't care enough. I understand that, y- you know, uh, with maybe some gay subcultures would really pose some sort of implicit challenge to many men's sense of themselves, and they might feel uncomfortable in that milieu, and I can understand that. But the mere fact, if okay, they're attracted to other men, but otherwise they're just nothing special stands out about them. I don't know. I have a hard time imagining why somebody would feel uncomfortable under those circumstances. I think you would have to go sort of out of your way to want to feel uncomfortable, because I don't think there's anybody pushing anything on you.
So men don't naturally note masculinity among other men. That's not an unspoken or a spoken language among them. It's just no big deal. Masculinity, femininity among men, it just doesn't register.
No, no, no. I'm not saying it doesn't register, but I think that
It's
a
all
lot of
cool.
gay men would still, notwithstanding their preferences, they still, if they're men, they still exude a certain level of masculinity. Like, I don't think that the fact they like other men means they can't do that. I agree. I mean, if you had like a gay guy who was really very like effeminate, yeah, if I were like interacting with him, I could imagine having some challenges interacting with him, maybe feeling uncomfortable insofar as, yeah, these are not traits with which I would like to engage if they're coming from another man. I could only be motivated to engage with them if it was somebody that I might be attracted to. So, I just, but if it's merely they like other men, I don't think that fact should have a profound influence on you
I'm not
unless you
asking if
really
it should.
want
I'm just
it to.
asking if it does.
Yeah,
Like, I'm not moralizing this. I'm just talking
yeah,
about how people are. And I
yeah.
would contend to you that men are
Maybe
different
they
from
are.
what you
I don't.
say.
I haven't studied the statistics, and I don't claim to be to have that much firsthand interaction with many broad swaths of the American population. So I'm not dismissing that.
Okay, let's switch gears. It's stunning to me the lack of effective opposition. It's stunning to me how the NC2A caved to what Trump legislated with regard to trans athletes. It's stunning to me how universities are loath to criticize Donald Trump. It's hilarious to me how big law doesn't want to contest Donald Trump. It's hilarious to me that while in the first Trump administration, it seemed like our major institutions and our major professions were eager to go to war with Donald Trump. And
Hmm.
now they are just as eager to avoid conflict with Donald Trump. That's, to me, hilarious. What's your reaction?
Yeah, well, for sure, but I think that's definitely there, and but I think that redounds to the liberal case that we are in a fascist moment, because that's sort of, precisely what happened, in the case of Italy and Germany, where you have these, like, strong business interests, and they're certainly, no, they weren't fans of Hitler. They saw him as something of a buffoon. Likewise with Mussolini, but in terms of, they didn't want trouble, and they thought at the end of the day, even though we don't like him, he will, like, advance our interests more than the left will. And so they went along with it. So it's not, yeah, if you compare it to 2016, 2017, it is indeed a profound change. But if you compare it to, historical patterns, perhaps far from surprising.
Yeah, well, how do you understand it? Because, well, first of all, what empirical reality is there to the claims that we're in a fascist moment? I would score that claim 0 out of 10. How about you?
I would not. I mean, listen, you have, I mean, you've got Trump's appointee as the U.S. attorney for the District of Washington. He is, like, sending letters to various entities threatening investigation on utterly spurious grounds. Because, people used martial metaphors in critiquing conservatives or the Supreme Court, or because Georgetown maybe has too much DEI content, things that are clearly non-criminal. And his job is criminal prosecutions, and for him to insert himself in that way, or for Trump to go to the DOJ and call Democratic lawmakers, the activities of certain Democratic lawyers illegal, thereby suggesting they should be investigated. I think that, I mean, we're not full blown fascism, but I don't see how you can deny the, similarities. I mean,
There's zero fascism in that. I mean, you could argue there's some element of authoritarianism, but there's absolutely nothing that's unique to fascism there. This is how power has operated since time immemorial, but there's nothing uniquely fascist.
Well, okay. I mean, I'll admit there's a distinction between authoritarianism and fascism, and what you're describing there could as well take place in a non-fascist authoritarian regime. And, I grant that certainly there's certain features of interwar Europe. If you define fascism narrowly in terms of that, which are not going to be replicated in America in 2025. So, but I think, you certainly have rhetoric from Trump that resonates with fascist discourse. We're letting in vermin; they're poisoning the blood of our country. The idea to resuscitate a historic greatness against the treacherous forces that threatened it. That's not just authoritarian. That is part.
But it's not
of
uniquely
the
fascist.
fascist.
I mean, people have spoken this way for thousands of years. There's nothing particularly fascist about it.
Well, I look. I mean, you could always say that, there's nothing unique about fascism insofar as it channels, maybe certain communitarian and impulses that have always been part of human nature, but got suppressed by the modern age. So human nature is human nature, and you can always find, all sorts of continuities between different cultures rather than crisp lines. But at a certain point, a difference in degree, a difference in quantity becomes a difference in quality. And I think there is enough of that stuff, of that fascist stuff, that the comparison is meaningful.
Okay, that doesn't make sense because you have zero fear that you're going to be arrested for what you say on this show. So all these thousands of people speaking out about fascism, they have zero fear that police are going to break down their door and arrest them tonight for what they may have said publicly in a public setting, making public proclamations accusing the government of fascism, but having zero fear of being arrested for doing so shows that you're obviously not in anything close to a fascist state.
Well, I mean, but fascist states become fascist states, incrementally. I'm not saying that we are 1939 Germany. There was a difference between 1931 or 1932 Germany and 1939 Germany. And I'm not saying that any society that has the beginnings of this will go until the end. I'm not saying that's an iron law of logic. But well, I mean, we're talking about getting disappeared. How about that Palestinian Columbia student?
He's not a citizen. He has zero rights.
He's a green card holder.
Yeah, he's not a citizen. And, his presence here is at the grace of the Secretary of the State. Secretary of State has the power to remove any green card holder if he judges him a supporter of authoritarianism or terror. He's not a citizen. He doesn't have rights.
That is contrary to established understanding. I don't think anybody until this point would say that somehow because you have a green card, you enjoy fewer First Amendment protections than a citizen would. I mean, the First Amendment.
Seriously, no one would say. I apologize. Finish your thought. I apologize. Go.
I just want to say the First Amendment restricts the power of Congress. It says, Congress shall not abridge free speech. It doesn't qualify that according to who the target is. And we have a baseline interest in not allowing the government to use its coercive force in order to suppress certain viewpoints, whether or not we have a constitutional democratic interest in that, regardless of whether the particular target is a green card holder or a citizen. I mean, I was a green card holder until I was like 27 for a long time, and I knew I couldn't vote. But in terms of expressing your viewpoint, I don't. I mean, and the fact is that they were just going to disappear him. It's one thing if they were going to initiate a civil lawsuit and say, we want to revoke your green card status on these grounds, and allowed him a due process opportunity to rebut those charges. Then we can talk about what his rights were in that context. But they were just going to disappear him and just fly him out of the country without any kind of adjudication. So regardless of what the ultimate justification might have been, just look at how they went about it.
Right, and you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that there's no legal precedent for any reduced First Amendment privileges for someone in this country who's not a citizen. And I think that's just absurd on its face, that it was obvious that you couldn't be a public supporter for the Communist Party and think that there'd be zero consequences to you living in the United States as a green card holder as opposed to being a citizen.
Well, I can imagine there might be social. I don't know. I mean, if the whole point. I mean, in terms of the rationales for free speech, the historic, John Stuart Mill rationales for free speech, I don't see why you would distinguish between green card holders and citizens, because let's say you say, well, we want people contributing to the marketplace of ideas. Well, if that's the rationale, why would you distinguish between the two? If it's a question of just the natural human right to express your views, why would you distinguish between the two? If it's a question of limiting the power of government to suppress criticism, why would you make that distinction? I don't see a basis for making that distinction. I mean, if you don't believe in free speech, that's something else. But if you do believe in free speech as a value, I don't see what basis you have for making the distinction.
Well, I don't see how you don't understand that citizenship carries privileges that not being a citizen does not have the same
Yeah,
privileges.
sure, it
There's
does
no
come. No
country in
question
the
on
world
it.
where non-citizens have the same privileges as citizens. You're obviously in a much more insecure standing as a non-citizen in the United States as compared to a citizen, not just in the United States, but on every country on earth.
In certain respects, that's the case. But I think you would acknowledge that non citizens have the right not to be murdered, right? To have police protection if somebody is trying to kill them. You wouldn't see a basis for making a distinction there, certainly. And I guess I would just see free expression as kind of in that category for the reasons that I just explained. So obviously the right to vote, and there may be other things as well. I mean, if you're a green card holder, you can't leave the country for an extended period of time as you could if you're a citizen. So yeah,
Were you ever threatened with having your green card taken away? Because I was. I
What's
left the
that?
country. I was threatened with having my green card taken away. I left the country for 11 months and 2 weeks, came home, no problem. And then 5 years later, I left the country for 7 months. And when I came back through customs, they said, this can be taken away. Did you ever have that experience where you were told, hey,
I
this can be
I
taken away?
I didn't, but I had to when I was in Israel for 1 year, I was going to be out of the country for over a year because it turned out that way because there was a strike in the Israeli university system, so my classes were extended, and I recall having to take special measures. Okay, but a restriction, those restrictions are viewpoint neutral restrictions. Their purpose is not to restrict which viewpoints are expressed. So there are
Well,
no
I
there
knew
are
you
no
could
First
not be
Amendment
a member of the
implications.
Communist Party. I knew you could not be a member of the Communist Party or be affiliated with the Communist Party in any way if you were going to honestly pass your citizenship test. Were you aware of that?
Um, I don't. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the case at the time. I mean, we think about the '50s, and
No, in
maybe
the
that
80s,
question.
into the 90s, I knew I
Maybe,
could have
okay.
no affiliation with the Communist Party. That is effectively a speech restriction.
Um. Well, to an extent. I mean, here's I would distinguish between that and this guy, Muhammad Khalil, I think, chanting, from the river to the sea, Palestine would be free. Because certainly during the Cold War, or at least the early periods of the Cold War, the U.S. Communist Party, just like the communist parties of Western Europe, were in fact ideologically subordinate to Moscow. So joining the Communist Party was not simply an expression of, I hold to these Marxist, theories about history and the ideal society. You're saying I am joining an organization which has, as part of its organizing principles, subservience to Moscow. Well, what does that say about you? Okay, so even so, you could say you are implicating yourself by joining this entity, but look, if there were actually allegations that this guy joined the American organization of Friends of Hamas, they like contributing $30 a year on Venmo or whatever. I mean, maybe we could start to have a conversation, but certainly the government has not put forward anything to suggest so much. As far as we know, he's just out there on the Columbia law saying, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." And maybe he's saying a lot of things that I would disagree with, or could it be interpreted in a way that I would disagree with him? But he's not. No one has said he's guilty of any crime. They can't point to any kind of tangible security risk like being a member of a certain organization. It's simply a function of an organization with actual links to terrorists or whatnot. It's simply his participation in these protests. So yeah, I would distinguish this case from the another one which you're hypothesizing.
So on a 0 to 100, with both 0 and 100 being metaphysical certainty, I have a metaphysical certainty of 0 that you will be arrested tonight or at any time for remarks you have made so far on this show. How about you? What do you
I
say the
agree. No,
chances?
I'm not disputing that. But why do we have this visceral certainty? We have this visceral certainty because it's always been the case. And what's going on right now, no matter how profound, cannot disturb that accumulated visceral sense of things. Uh, but people have, that you could not assign, undue importance to that visceral feeling because we know it, throughout history in a wide variety of contexts, people have had that sense. Nothing is really going to change, and then it does change. Um, so I'm not disputing your sentiments, and I share them on that level, but I also am suspicious of them.
Well, I started blogging in 1997, and I've always had the sense that I don't want to arouse the ire of my community.
Mhm.
And so we all operate with the tacit goodwill or active goodwill of our community, and nobody can happily and safely live in a community that is roused to loathing against you. With all the laws in the world, the fact of human relations is you cannot live safely and peacefully in a community that hates you. Is that fair?
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I mean, in any kind of debate, I think it's important, not to go out of your way to antagonize people. Sometimes they will be antagonized just by virtue of your ideas, but you shouldn't. Yeah, you shouldn't push the envelope if you don't. If you don't have to. So I agree with that principle.
And so, do you accept also that dictatorship is a fundamental part? It's a fundamental part of all working constitutional democratic systems. That there always have to be mechanisms for uh, executive leeway. So when a policeman arrests you, he effectively has dictatorial power over you for a while. That if, as an executive, you claim a state of emergency and the rest of government and majority of citizens go along with you, you have declared a state of emergency, such as during COVID, that people should not participate in large gatherings, that many different businesses should shut down. Abraham Lincoln took away habeas corpus, that all sorts of rights that people have taken for granted are always taken away in a state of emergency, that this is how all functioning democracies work, that there's always considerable leeway for dictatorial powers. For example, during the global financial crash, Ben Bernanke was able to come up with a huge list of actions to save the American economy. He had close to dictatorial power during that. So is that dictatorial element not an essential part of all functioning democracies?
Uh, I'll agree that it certainly has some part, but it has to be a circumscribed part. So let's take your first example. So if I get arrested by a cop for whatever reason, and even if I'm totally persuaded that the grounds for arrest are spurious or they've made some sort of huge mistake, um, I'm not going to physically resist that arrest.
Yeah.
because in that context, as you said, they are the dictator. You can't have a functioning society where my belief that I'm right legally justifies me in resisting, even if I am right. Uh, I still have to submit under those circumstances. But then, yeah, I go to jail, but they have to have me in front of a judge within a certain amount of time. I can speak to a lawyer. Then there are mechanisms for uh, circumscribing that. And so, yeah, I'll concede in certain situations. Yeah, there are not going to be checks and balances, but but well, I mean, even in the cop situation, there's still checks and balances. Like they know that if he beats me up for no reason, I can sue. You know, so but even to the extent that those are limited, I'm not going to say because in certain contexts you can't make do without that. You have to just submit that therefore we should have no concern about the risks of these tendencies, these dictatorial tendencies spreading and hypertrophying.
So the same elite news media that participated in a cover-up of Joe Biden's periodic senility is now covering the Donald Trump White House. Do you understand why those of us who are not on the left have some skepticism that they would go along with a cover-up to protect Joe Biden, and now they're claiming that they are trying to just follow their journalistic duty with Donald Trump?
Look, I mean, I'm not. Obviously, I'm not going to argue that journalists are liberal journalists are above subterranean, unacknowledged partisan allegiances. I mean, you can certainly find certain they were not as critical, as suspicious as they should have been with Joe Biden. So, but I see these problems as far greater on the right. Where you have, for example, during the ambush of Zelensky, they had it was I think it was the boyfriend of Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's in some right wing, I don't know if it's Newsmax or whatever. He like attacked Zelensky for his clothing. He's a member of he's a journalist, but it's clear that he's operating in conjunction with MAGA. I don't think liberals are hypocritical because they're torn between some of the biases which you've described and these principles. And fine, but at least they're hewing to the principle or trying to hew to the principle to some degree. Whereas you will find, outright, complete obsequiousness and collaboration from Fox News and certainly not Fox News from various outlets further to the right, like Newsmax, One America News, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. But all elite news media is effectively left of center and pretty much participated in a cover up of Joe Biden's periodic senility. That there's no elite media that is right of center, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I mean, certainly the people who were spent their days with Joe Biden. I think we can say they participated in the cover up. As far as what did the news, did they actually have more information than the rest of the public did, or did they just have the same information? And I guess they spun it to cohere with their preconceptions.
Well, didn't careful critical discourse play a significant role here? I interviewed a political scientist the other day who was on the right, and he had a tweet: "You can't accurately describe reality without violating tenets of political correctness."
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you could say, you could say they fundamentally agreed with Biden's overall worldview, and so they saw any senility as just like these temporary glitches the guy is, fundamentally with us, part of our culture, whereas they don't see that with Trump. Yeah, look, it would have been better. I mean, had he been called out much sooner, and had there been a genuine primary in the Democratic Party, no question. But I'm still less disturbed by Biden losing his train of thought every 25 seconds. Um, that I mean that is cognitive decline, but it's not derangement, which is what I see with Trump. I mean, have you seen, I mean, think about derangement. The first administration was like, fight COVID by injecting bleach into your veins, and now we've had this, we're going to take over Gaza. Like have you seen the absolutely crazy AI video of Gaza
Yes, isn't that
reimagined?
hilarious? Why don't
It's
you see the
not.
hilariousness of it?
I mean, I want to take some mushrooms or acid and trip out on that. It's completely crazy, but
Why isn't it
it,
funny? Without
it's very
mushrooms.
funny.
Okay, it's very funny.
It's very fun. I'm amused. I'm not disputing that, but it's still kind of a demented vision coming from a president who has announced, something like that as official U.S. policy. And
Oh,
will it
it's
ever happen?
hilarious.
Probably not. But it will certainly give Israel a license to be very heavy-handed in trying to clear out as many people out of Gaza as they can.
So, as I understand it, Ronnie, we only got the term ethnic cleansing in the early 1990s, and prior to the 1950s, it was almost de facto a rule of war that if you launch an offensive war against a neighbor and you lose, that your type of government doesn't stay in place, and your people will have to bear the price paid for the
Mhm.
diminishment of your state. So ethnic cleansing is now like some sacred category that should never be engaged in, but it was almost de facto the rule of how the world worked prior to the 1950s. You launch an offensive war against a neighbor, you lose. There's a very good chance that your government will be diminished and many or all of your people will be moved.
Um, I mean, first of all, so let's say if we people have not always defined their allegiances through their ethnicity. So in the Middle Ages, if you look at, let's say, the Kingdom of France, you had different groups. You had Bretons, Normans, various. You had a variety of ethnicities who spoke somewhat different, dialects of Old French or Latin derivative. They were united by, which monarchic line are you, loyal to? And they knew, if you were loyal to this line, and then there was a war, as in the 100 Years' War, your village might be ransacked and you killed by the army of the other monarchic line, which you've rejected. So, I mean, in terms of like violent tendencies among human beings, that's always been there. In terms of like what's most important about us is our ethnicity. We need to get these people off this land. That wasn't always considered so important. You had multi-ethnic empires, the Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman Empire. I think for long swaths of time, people didn't make their ethnicity their central motivator. So I don't think, I mean, the crooked timber of humanity has always been with us. But I think you want to distinguish between certain modern nationalistic drives and, other manifestations of our, chimp-like primate nature.
So Stephen Miller, when Trump was out of power, he ran something called approximately America First Foundation, and
Mm.
they sued a lot of law firms for promoting DEI. They sued them for practicing racial discrimination against white people, and they deliberately chose law firms because, in their thinking, law firms are the most risk averse companies, and there are big downstream effects. That, as the most risk averse, when law firms back away from DEI programs, there are all sorts of downstream effects of that. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, DEI is a very broad umbrella, and should we have African Americans getting into Harvard on average with an SAT that's 300 or 400 points lower than the average Asian? I can understand the objections, but the attack on DEI has gone far beyond that. And it's like any kind of acknowledgement of historic racism, any acknowledgement of, okay, blacks, these other groups, they've made various forms of progress in different institutions. All of any kind of acknowledgement of any kind is now dismissed by conservatives as DEI and wokeness. Like you had DeSantis. Okay, it's one thing to say, we're going to, we're not going to embrace critical race theory as our official ideology. We're not going to say that any inequality is a function of white supremacy. But then you've had moves from the right not only to oppose that stuff, but to express any acknowledgement of slavery. Like in the DeSantis proposed school curriculum, they had to say, well, yeah, maybe slavery was bad, but they learned some skills they could take with them. Or maybe there were attacks on blacks, but there were sometimes attacks on whites too. So that's where the conservative attack on DEI I find disturbing, because it goes far beyond the things that we might agree are problematic, maybe affirmative action, maybe certain very cringe identitarian impulses. We can agree that those are bad, but I think the conservative opposition to DEI increasingly is veering towards the genuinely reactionary.
Well, DEI means anti-white. I don't think it's that complicated, and I don't know why white people would be cool with going on more than 50 years of active anti-white policies. I don't know why white people would just be down with that.
Well, I mean, if it is anti-white, then obviously they're going to oppose. But the question of do we is celebrating Martin Luther King Day anti-white, because in celebrating it you are acknowledging this history of white wrongdoing, right? It is not celebrating, it does not place whites historically in the best light. So in that respect, yeah, I mean, you can call it anti-white. I don't know. Is that enough to be anti-white? I see how it is on this minimal level, but I don't think it's one that should you know undercut our identities.
Is it true that law firms tend to be highly risk averse?
I think so.
And so, was that not a savvy move by the Stephen Miller administration, no matter how you ideologically regard it? Was that not a savvy move going after law firms with the thinking that there are going to be profound downstream effects of challenging law firms on DEI because they're so risk
Yeah,
averse?
I mean, look, I mean, they might be right tactically.
Yeah.
They may have calculated correctly. I can also acknowledge, there were some, very competent Nazi generals as well, right? But the fact that they may have tactically or strategically they may be competent, that doesn't enamor me to their cause.
Okay.
Because you've had they're trying to penalize law firms because they represent certain people, I think the Covington and
Like the
Burling.
left, the elite law firms overwhelmingly side left. They promote left-wing causes. Why would a non-left government be okay with that?
Well, you don't have to like it, but
Why would you not push back on it? They're trying to fuck you over. Why would you not fuck them over after decades of them fucking you over?
well, if you reduce everything to that, then at that point there's no rule of law. There's just you fucking me over and my perception of that magnitude and vice versa. That's very human. I understand how one might feel that way, but once you give into that, however natural it may feel, then you have no neutral principles by which to constrain government.
So you regard law as some transcendent category that exists outside of space and time?
Well, it doesn't have to exist outside of space and time, but it has to feel imposing enough that it's going to seriously restrain our more natural primate instincts, which is you fucked me, now I'm going to fuck you. I think it can perform that function. Is there a certain mystique that we're adding to it in order for it to perform that function? Are we are we venerating the Constitution in quasi religious terms to a certain extent? Maybe we are, but I think that has a salubrious function.
So has there ever been a time in the history of the United States where law has existed outside of politics? I would contend no. There's never been such a time.
No, it's always been an interaction with politics, but that doesn't mean that it's merely been subservient or a derivative expression of politics. So if you look, let's say, desegregation, when the Supreme Court handed down Brown versus Board of Education, well, it was quite a while before that could actually be enforced, because they had very large swaths of the country, the Deep South, against them. It's not something they would have attempted, let's say, back in 1915. They would have lost, all legitimacy by the mid 50s. They certainly didn't have full buy-in, but they had enough that they could hand down that decision. So yes, it was certainly informed by the surrounding political circumstances, but it's also interacted with the circumstances. It also tried to change them. It also created a challenge to them. So it's not fully transcendent. I agree. That's kind of a mystification, but it kind of has that social function to an extent.
So I recently reread a book by a UCLA law professor. It just came out last year. It's called The Most Powerful Court in the World, a history of the Supreme Court of the United States. And I love this little passage here. People today sometimes think of the early 19th century as a golden age before politics corrupted the court. Such a view would have seemed laughable to people at the time. They knew, as well as we do, that the justices' policy views profoundly affected their decisions in politically inflected cases. In fact, if anything, they would have known it even more, because so many of the justices came to the court after years in Congress or in the cabinet or in the state legislature. They had plainly been appointed because of their political opinions rather than their skill at judging. Whether contemporaries agreed or disagreed with the decision, they frankly discussed the politics of the argument on both sides. When a decision was contrary to the policy view of members of Congress, members were not shy about proposing legislation to curtail the court's authority. The court's decisions were also sharply criticized in the press to a degree that could make the justices uncomfortable. And I'll continue, there was never a time when the court's decision were understood as based purely on law as distinct from politics. People understood the two were always intertwined. Agree, disagree? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's certainly been in a variety of professions. It's not just law. You could also point to, journalism and the civil service. As the 19th century progressed and turned in the 20th century to professionalize these things, to say, these functions are going to be governed by rules rather than individual personalities and allegiances. Um, and so, are we going to say that, they were simply more honest with themselves back in the beginnings of the 19th century, and then now we're doing the same thing, but merely, covering it up with a veneer of neutrality. Okay, I mean, a veneer can begin thin and then, thicken a little bit and then become consequential in its own right. So this baseline level of human nature, which was once, more forthrightly acknowledged, as you've described through that quote, it's going to remain there on some level all along, but I think it can be constrained by, these norms of neutrality and abstraction and the suspension of ideology. Even though there's a certain artificiality and all that, and we can always find a bit of seepage. I'm looking at how, yeah, but at the end of the day, you see how why their reasoning turned this way rather than that way. It had something to do with their wider allegiances, which are not being acknowledged here. Sure, that's true, but that doesn't render the restriction, the control of those impulses unreal.
So I see the Trump administration as abiding by court decisions about as much as any other presidential administration. How do you see it?
I think, from what I've learned, it's too early to judge. They certainly haven't outright defied the courts. They've, complied in certain respects. In many contexts, it's a question of, yeah, well, we're trying to comply, but effectuating your order is very difficult for reasons X, Y, and Z. Part of those X, Y, and Z being like the chaos which the Republicans, the Doge, have already unleashed. So, it may actually be quite complicated to follow these court orders. But eventually, we are going to get some clarity as to whether they, will obey the court. So I think just very recently, they were ordered by two courts to rehire a bunch of probationary employees, and we're going to see at a certain point, have they tried to comply with those court orders? Have they done everything possible to try to relocate these people and offer them their jobs back? And we will see the record. I think it's too early to tell. I agree they're not complying enthusiastically, um, but I don't think Biden was enthusiastic, but I don't, I think he fully complied with everything. But so the issue is not so much what they've done so far, but that you have these noises coming from J.D. Vance and others that somehow the judiciary is usurping these executive powers and has no entitlement to do so. That's what I find disturbing, because it seems to be setting the groundwork for some future outright disobedience.
So,
That I'm worried about.
what's your primary source of information with regard to what you're just talking about?
Well, I mean, let's say you have the tweet from J.D.
But
Vance.
you're not on Twitter.
Yeah, but it's been reproduced
Okay,
elsewhere.
so what's your primary source of information? Is it the New York Times? Where is it?
It's the New York Times. It's
Okay.
random YouTube videos. I will read the National Review uh, fairly regularly to get that side. I'll watch the Bulwark, which are never
Anti-Trump.
Trump conservatives. Uh, I do read like a range of things.
Now, I think that Donald Trump owes a significant part of his election to the efforts of Alvin Bragg, Jack Smith, and Fani Willis, while the case with Trump
Hmm.
mishandling classified documents struck me as quite strong. But the other prosecutions seem to be so perverse that it ended up helping Donald Trump. What do you think?
Well, okay, so I mean, certainly, the Alvin Bragg, I agree, is certainly the most questionable. It's not; these aren't charges that you would normally bring. Certainly not on their own. They're frequently brought in conjunction with other more serious charges, but not on their own. And you've got yeah, you got some potential legal stretches. And I agree that the documents was the strongest. I guess where we disagree is the January 6th cases. I think when you look at the totality of the evidence, they wanted the rioters to prevent the certification in one way or the other. I mean, I can't see how that could not be illegal on some level. Um, so that's how I see things. I agree. Alvin
Wait,
Bragg
let me
is
just jump
illegal.
on that. I'm sure you could make a case it was illegal on some level, but there needs to be a higher bar for going after a former president of the United States. And Jack Smith's what struck me as kind of unhinged attack diminished his credibility, while a much smarter strategy would have been a little more modest and more effective. Thoughts?
I mean, I read the indictment a long time ago, so I can't go into the details. Um, I agree that I mean, yeah, if you look at, you might say his interpretations of the law are unprecedented, but it's an unprecedented situation. And even though the law thrives on precedent, you can't say that therefore it has to become inapplicable when you're in an unprecedented situation. And it does seem to me like there was an effort through a variety of mechanisms to thwart the lawful transmission of power based on actual electoral results. I think there's plenty of evidence that Trump knew he was trying to do that. He was telling the his attorney general to go find evidence of fraud, even though all the experts, Republicans, had told him there was no significant fraud. So I think it's totally plausible that there was some sort of criminal nefarious intent there. He's not a dumb guy, even though he's dumb in certain ways. I think he certainly understood that.
So,
Um,
So, as
yeah.
a philosopher, what are the good books to understand our current times? One philosopher told me read Clinton Rossiter, particularly his work "Constitutional Dictatorship: Crisis, Government in the Modern Democracies," a book that came out in 1948, I believe. Or there's Carl Schmitt's great work on dictatorship, which was published circa 1925. What are good, solid works of philosophy to help us understand our current times, aside from your excellent conservative claims of cultural oppression?
Oh wow. I mean, wow. What do I would I think Christopher Lasch, maybe the Revolt of the Elites, or the True and Only Heaven. I think it's kind of an effort to take cognizance of right wing cultural grievances, maybe coming from an economically leftist point of view, but also a critique of the liberal elites. I would recommend those books. Um,
I
yeah,
heard, I was listening to Musa Al-Gharbi, a sociologist from Columbia University, and he describes woke as elite competition. That when you have an oversupply of elites, you need to have some way of winnowing the crowd. And while it's ostensibly about equality, it's largely about competition between elites. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly, again, that's I don't have a problem with that because a lot of what conservative claims of cultural oppression is how like the liberal elites evince the same vices, the same competitive, selfish vices which they can condemn in conservatism, but express them in sort of a subtler way through their professional mores, and wokeism is one manifestation of that. Yeah, sort of oblique form of status competition. So yeah, that's insofar as that's what you mean by wokeness. I see that why that's objectionable. What I don't like is that I think that then conservatives will establish that much, but then take their gains there to try to then define wokeness in ever more expansive ways. Like any concern for human equality or dignity becomes wokeness. Any concern for due process. So Trump was saying, "Well, I'm invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. We could never pass such a law today. We're too woke." So what does woke mean there? It just means a concern for due process, which is much stronger today than it was in the 18th century. So that's why I suspect the discourse of critiquing wokeness is that, yeah, you'll establish the negative emotional resonances of the term wokeness by attacking certain things which we might agree are obviously problematic, but then those are exploited. Those resonances are exploited to attack all sorts of values which should be considered mainstream. It should not be seen as somehow elite or progressive or avant-garde.
Well, should, depending entirely on the nature of your hero system. Like what's should for you is the opposite for me in many places.
I guess, but certainly there was a time 15 years ago where most self-professed conservatives would not have seen those as antithetical because
Right,
they
but
wouldn't
conservatism
necessarily.
didn't conserve anything. That's why many of us on the right are not particularly enamored with conservatism anymore.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. But I guess if that's the case, if there is just like this break from traditional conservatism, then then yeah, then just acknowledge it, and certainly some right wingers have acknowledged it. Many have said, we are post liberal. We don't believe in these things anymore on any level. Yeah, I guess they're honest. I guess I can't impugn them on that front.
And what do you think about the threat of Christian nationalism? Are you losing sleep?
No, I'm not. I mean, you're right. I mean, nobody's gonna, nobody's gonna come on my door here. Again, I don't think it's a concocted identity. I don't think it has a historical basis, but except insofar as it has a basis in a hero system. A Christian nationalism is a bona fide hero system, whereas civic duty within a duly constituted republic is kind of lame by comparison in terms of its intrinsic human appeal. So, I see why people are drawn to that. It's not unnatural.
Have you ever seen the Democratic Party this much of a mess?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I've seen some of the very cringe videos, like "We Will Win," like with Chuck Schumer, and so forth. Yeah, it's generally quite cringy. There have been some exceptions. I think, like Mark Kelly, like selling his Tesla, calling Elon an asshole. You have some moments, but generally unimpressive.
So Democrats are struggling to connect with the American people, and one way they're trying to do it is by swearing a lot more and by going on sports podcasts. So, are there any spokespeople for the center left and the left, leading Democratic politicians who you think are effective, authentic, compelling communicators?
Well, I mean, I don't think Bernie Sanders. I don't think he's lost his magic. I mean, he's never going to be president. He's never going to, crystallize latent political forces to overturn the system. That ship has sailed. But can he communicate certain points in a persuasive and plausible way? I think he can do that. He's not seen as culturally alien.
Is there anything you can tell me about your efforts to publish your ideas related to your work in progress, conservative claims of cultural oppression, and what kind of reception you might be getting? Anything that you can disclose publicly?
Well, I'm going. I haven't done much recently, but it is my intent to just, start sending it off to various academic publishers. I'm kind of trepidatious about the outcome. I mean, for one thing, the length is a problem in itself. But even and also, I'm not affiliated with the university now. But maybe I'll play the numbers game. I published my fat acceptance
Mm-hmm.
article.
Yeah, you
I
published that?
I published it in a daily philosophy. I had to trim it down
You'll have to
considerably.
send me the link. I'll look for it.
Okay, I'll send it to you. It's like it's like a third of its original length, less nuanced in a certain way, but easier to read. But it's got a little bit of attention. I have a few comments, not many.
Oh,
So
I got
I'm
it.
working
I
on
found
another
it.
article. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever get my name out. My website is there. The memoir is still available for sale. The Conservative Claims of Cultural Oppression PDF is there for download. But I'm trying to. It's interesting you asked that question because I'm trying to be very zen about it. Like I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe I will continue to be ignored. It's quite possible. I just don't know. So I'm just going to keep on, writing articles, trying to get my name out it. But I hope to do it in a kind of detached Zen fashion, where I'm not getting overly invested in it because it's just not good for me.
Right. I mean, this should be your cultural moment that we're having the most revolutionary overturning of elites in America
Right.
since the Roosevelt administration.
You would think, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, I purport to explain a lot of what's going on. I think I saw these things, when they were still just germinating, and now they've come to sort of obvious fruition. But at the end of the day, it was just it's very when you have these academic tombs, it's very hard to get people's attention. And you would think even the memoir, the Stanford memoir, it's about a Joe Bankman, Barbara Freed. You think like that, have that element to it. It didn't really change all that much in terms of sales. Maybe a little bit. So I don't know. I don't purport to understand why some things take off when they do and some things don't. I don't know.
Do you have a
Um,
favorite reality TV show?
Not recently. I mean, I have to. It's been a long time since I watched any reality TV show. If I watch anything like many years ago, I did watch The Apprentice.
What
Um,
did what do you remember?
I mean, yeah, it was entertaining. After a day's work, a good way to engage yourself. But right now, I don't. I mean, I don't have TV. I mean, I'll watch YouTube or
Well, you
Netflix.
should be up to. It's on Amazon Prime. I mean, that should be a gold mine for you.
The Apprentice.
Yeah, you rewatch that and you put it into
Yeah,
philosophical terms and you explain Trump through the
right.
combo of reality TV. It's like there are
How Trump
philosophical
became
books.
Trump through The Apprentice.
Yeah, there are philosophical books about the philosophy of Monty
Right.
Python, the philosophy of The
Yeah.
Simpsons, the philosophy of
Yeah.
The Apprentice.
Yeah. I can see that.
I mean, it might be fun.
Yeah. I will think about that. Amazon. I'm Amazon Prime.
Yeah. Okay. Any final words before we wrap up?
I think that's it. We had a good talk. So I will send you the link for my fat acceptance article. Yeah, if you can disseminate it.
Yes, yes. I found the link. I'm putting it in the show notes, so
Okay, great,
I'll send it to my enormous audience.
awesome.